Lots of stuff going on this week as we talk about the convergence of events in Bible prophecy. And there's some things that we need to talk about this week, some things that happened. A lot of it focuses on Israel, and we will probably get to that at some place today. But there are things that are happening that need to be discussed. We have our president wanting to put into place climate change policies that will absolutely sink our economy worse than anything we could imagine. It may lead to power outages. Wants to shut down all the coal plants. And he thinks that, and this is going to be a recurring theme today, that there's a passage in Romans chapter 1, if you want to turn to it, because I think it's operative. And just as they did not see fit, to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do those things which are not proper, being filled with all unrighteousness, wickedness, greed, evil, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, without understanding, untrustworthy, unloving, unmerciful. And although they know the ordinance of God, that those who practice such things are worthy of death, they not only do the same, but also give hearty approval to those who practice them. Boy, does that describe the world that was revealed to us this week. Look at what's going on in the world. This is a report from CBS the other night about a massive heat wave.
This is the kind of heat we expect out here in late summer. Not only is this brutal heat wave hitting earlier than usual, it's expected to be the worst in a decade. In Las Vegas by 9 this morning, it was already past 100 degrees. With Sin City so devilishly hot, air conditioning repairman Michael Gamst is working overtime.
Very busy. We started extremely early and I don't know what time we're going to get done.
There was no fun in the sun at camp, just punishing heat. Counselor Nate Jaramillo is limiting campers' outside time.
We've been told there's an excessive heat warning. We're expecting temperatures above 115 degrees throughout the entire weekend.
Tucson was hotter than Cairo, Egypt. California's Death Valley hotter still, approaching 130 degrees. It's caused by a huge dome of hot air stalled over the west. Researchers say get used to it. Alexander Gershinoff, who studies climate change at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, says western heat waves are changing.
The new types of heat waves that are becoming increasingly frequent are humid heat waves, and with high humidity we actually have much hotter nighttime temperatures.
California is expecting demand for electricity to heat up. Steve Berberick oversees the state's power grid.
Turn up your air conditioner just a couple of degrees. It may be a little bit uncomfortable, but it's a lot more uncomfortable if you don't have enough power.
Extreme heat causes more than 600 deaths a year. It's the leading cause of weather-related deaths in the U.S. In L.A., people without air conditioners, like Julia Amezcua, are flooding the county's 91 cooling centers.
When you're in here, you don't think about the heat outside.
The National Weather Service has posted an excessive heat warning for most of California, Arizona, and Nevada. And Scott, that's an area that's home to more than 30 million people.
Bill Whitaker, thank you, Bill. Bill mentioned that the temperature in Death Valley, California was approaching 130. Well, the hottest day ever recorded on Earth was in Death Valley, almost exactly 100 years ago, July 10th, 1913. It hit 134.
California.
Tonight, members of Congress are headed out of Washington on a week-long break, leaving Monday's deadline on student loans to come and go without any action. That means millions of students will start paying double. Regardless of what lawmakers eventually do, the price of college has left a lot of families deep in debt. We get our report tonight from our chief education correspondent, Rahena Ellis.
In Washington, students outside the Capitol blasted lawmakers for failing to act, ensuring student loans will double to 6.8% on Monday. That hike affects the estimated 7 million students expected to take out new federally subsidized Stafford loans this year.
Now, what the irony of that is, it's the availability of loan money that's increased the cost of college education. There's a direct correlation between the amount of money available for loans and the cost of the college education. That's why the price has gone up. Whereas we paid a few $1,000s a year back in the 70s, it's now 10 times that amount. And I'm pretty sure that the parents of the students aren't earning 10 times the amount that they did, but there's a lot of loan money available. Student debt now totals over $1 trillion in the United States. Now this will lead to change. This is what if you think the earthquakes that we saw morally, legally, and otherwise this week are the exception, I believe going forward they're going to be the rule. So there is a sea change coming in education. There's a consortium of Silicon Valley executives, rich people that are billionaires, these 25, 26, 27, 28-year-old billionaires, who are now lobbying to make big changes in Washington to benefit the technology companies in Silicon Valley. And in fact, what you will find is that they are now paying lobbyists as much from the Silicon Valley area as oil and gas companies pay, utility companies pay, and financial companies pay. So there's a lot, and so when money flows from a place to Washington, you can bet that things are going to be changed to adapt. One of the things that's going to happen in education is they're putting everything online for free. They're called MOOCs, M-O-O-C-S, Massive Open Online Courses, M-O-O-C, MOOCs. And they're available, and now some colleges are gaining credit for it, and Ivy League colleges are putting their thing online. There are some professors now that have as many as 150,000 students watching their lectures in a particular subject. It's going to change education, and I'm on a college board, have been for a long time, and I'm sitting there wondering what it looks like. What's a residential college look like in 5 years? What's it look like in 2 years as these things come online? Because the Silicon Valley guys say, well, let's just make everything available for free. Put it online. There's a thing called the Khan Academy. Have you heard of it? The guy, he's a PhD, Bangladeshi or Pakistani guy, or Indian guy named Khan, who has a niece, and the niece said, hey, Uncle Sammy, would you help me with my homework? So he started posting videos online helping her with her homework. There are now over 3,000 of these available for free. He's received a $50 million grant from the Gates Foundation, and a lot of schools are using these things to educate their students. These are secondary, and it's not going to affect just colleges, it's going to affect primary and secondary schools in your neighborhood. And teachers are using them. They have an iPad. They can see who's having trouble working through the problem and go meet with that individual student. The teacher becomes more of a facilitator. And so this stuff is happening all over, and it's changing things. Now, the church and Christians could use that type of information too if they're prepared. You know, what man can use for evil, God can use for good. But there are sea changes coming. There's some changes coming in the economy as the Fed moves back from its quantitative easing. What that plays out, I don't know. The price of gold is collapsing. People say, just go ahead and buy it and just hold on to it for a while. Don't worry about it. Probably good advice. Culturally, this lady in the middle, they wanted to pass a law restricting abortions in Texas after the time that a fetus can feel pain. Scientifically proven, 17, 18 weeks after conception, a fetus can feel pain. So an abortion is not a painless procedure for the infant that's killed. Texas wanted to enact this, and this lady stood on the last day of the legislative session and did a filibuster in her little pink sneakers. And this lady protects the right of babies to be killed late term. And she is universally hailed as a hero by Planned Parenthood and others. It shows the moral collapse of our culture. This military is now giving salute to Gay Pride Month, celebrating, well, here's what it says in the letter over here. We recognize gay, lesbian, and bisexual service members and LGBT civilians for their dedicated service to our country. Each year of his administration, President Obama has issued a proclamation recognizing that our national security is strengthened by the heroic contributions these Americans make to our department and have made throughout our history. But what are the facts? You've heard about increased sexual assaults in the military? Because now, you believe that that's male on female. The reality is that half of them are male on male, even though there's a smaller percentage of homosexuals in the military. Nobody ever tells you about that. But that's the fact. That's what those statistics actually show when you look at them. And the president's threatened to veto anything that would give free speech rights to chaplains. The president, remember, before he took office, said that he was just a few days away from what? Fundamentally transforming the United States of America. And you know what? I believed him. And you know what? He is. And much of it is not for good. Well, this week, the Supremes came out with a couple decisions. In the DOMA case, the Windsor case, and the California Prop 8 case, the Hollingsworth versus Perry case. Neither of the rulings was good. I've heard conservative groups try to spin it that, it's not that bad. Don't worry about it. I'm telling you, it is that bad. Worry about it. It is a sea change in our culture. And the opinions of the court, and we'll take a look at this over the next few minutes, are inexplicable from a legal standpoint. They don't make sense, and they're confusing, and they will lead to many, many problems going forward. Headlines everywhere: rainbow rulings, historic win for gay marriage, victories for gay marriage, front pages of all the papers, wins for gay couples. In Gloucester, Massachusetts, a seaside town, they flew the rainbow flag under the United States. This is the breakdown. Both decisions were 5-4. I'm not sure, I still haven't figured out what in the Prop 8 case, in the majority opinion, they're very hard to explain what's going on in California. I will try in just a moment. In the DOMA case, the left-leaning justices all voted in favor of declaring at least that particular provision of DOMA unconstitutional. And Kennedy wrote the majority opinion. Of course, the conservative people, Roberts, Scalia, Alito, and Thomas, voted against it. However, in the Prop 8 case, which had a little bit different flavor to it, Scalia and Roberts actually voted to affirm what the Ninth Circuit had done. Or they voted to say that the plaintiffs and the defendants in the case who were appealing the decision of the California court had no standing. Let me see if I can explain this, because this is very confusing. In order for there to be a case or controversy, you have to have two adversarial parties. And so under the Constitution of the United States, you can only bring a case in federal court if there is a case or a controversy. In other words, if there is a dispute. So for example, if you run over me with your car and I sue you, I just assume I can sue you in federal court for that. I sue you in federal court. I'm the plaintiff, you're the you're the defendant, and that's adversarial. That's a case or controversy. But what happened in the California case was a couple of lesbian couples, homosexual couples in San Francisco filed a case in federal court saying that the Proposition 8 that had been enacted by a 53% majority of the California voters in 2008 was unconstitutional because it denied them equal protection of the law, because they were entitled to be married just like anybody else. And the fact that the people of California had voted to support gay marriage, traditional marriage, had voted to support traditional marriage, that was part of an animus against homosexual couples. And the way the court looks at these with a certain kind of scrutiny, there was no rational basis for that law. And so Judge Walker, and we'll discuss it a little bit more in a moment, said, yep, it's part of animus of the majority of the California voters, denies equal protection, not telling anybody or not letting it be known that he himself was a homosexual, involved in a long-term homosexual relationship. He said it's unconstitutional. Now, the case was defended by a group of people who had been the proponents of Proposition 8. Because usually, the California law, when a state statute or constitutional provision is challenged as unconstitutional, there's an obligation for the governor and the attorney general of the state of California to defend the law in court. But what happened here was the governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger, didn't like Proposition 8, didn't support Proposition 8, and he said, I'm not going to defend it. Jerry Brown, the attorney general at the time, now the governor of California, said, I'm not going to defend it either. So nobody was left to defend it. Now, they could have gone in a collusive lawsuit and just sort of laid down and had the same result. But a group came in to defend it because there was nobody to defend it. It then went, and the challenge was made, hey, you guys don't have standing to challenge the lawsuit. You're not, you people who were the proponents of Proposition 8, you have no standing, you have no skin in the game, even though they had enacted it as a majority of the state citizens in California who had voted in that election. So the people wanting it overturned said, you guys don't have standing to defend it, we should win. It should be a default judgment because the governor and the attorney general of California won't show up. So that went to the Supreme Court of California for advice. And the Supreme Court of California said, no, the people that brought the case or defending it have standing to defend it. So the case went forward, there was a trial. Ted Olson and David Boies represented the plaintiffs, and Judge Walker, the homosexual judge, gave his opinion saying it was unconstitutional. Now they get up to the Ninth Circuit, and the Ninth Circuit says no standing. I don't remember what the Ninth Circuit said. I think the Ninth Circuit affirmed Judge Walker's ruling. Because if you work in the practice of law like I do, you know that the Ninth Circuit is crazy. And most of the cases that get, the largest number of cases appealed to the Supreme Court come out of the Ninth Circuit because the judges out there are just crazy. They do crazy things. They don't follow the law. So it went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, with Roberts writing the decision and Scalia joining in that opinion, said they didn't have standing. So now it goes back to the California court. California law says, wait a minute, you have to get an appellate court ruling that the thing is unconstitutional. You just can't get a district court. And the appellate court vacated its opinion at the direction of the Supreme Court, and then said the district court order could go into effect, and now it's in effect, and they're having gay marriages even as we speak in California. So Prop 8 backers are just upset. One thing that's interesting in terms of the timing of this is that these decisions came out on June 26, 2013, and that's exactly 10 years to the day after the Lawrence versus Texas decision, which said you could not have sodomy laws. Any sodomy laws in the United States were void as unconstitutional. An opinion written by Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, appointed by Reagan. Justice Kennedy wrote the opinion in the Windsor case, the DOMA case, appointed by Reagan. So don't think that just electing certain parties will get you where you want. Here's what David Boies, the attorney in the DOMA case, or the Prop 8 case, had to say.
This is a great day for America. 10 years ago today, the United States Supreme Court in Lawrence against Texas took the first important step to guaranteeing that all Americans, regardless of sexual orientation, were equal citizens under the law. Today, the United States Supreme Court, in two important decisions, brings us that much closer to true equality. In the decision striking as unconstitutional the so-called DOMA, or defensive marriage case, the United States Supreme Court held that there was no purpose for depriving gay and lesbian couples of the right to marry the person they loved. There was no legitimate justification for that. As Justice Scalia noted, that holding, that principle, guarantees the right of every individual in every state to marriage equality.
Here's Kennedy's opinion. The history of DOMA's enactment and its own text demonstrate that interference with the equal dignity of same-sex marriages, the dignity conferred by the states in the exercise of their sovereign power, was more than an incidental effect of the federal statute. It was its essence. In other words, the people who enacted DOMA in 1997 or 96 were bigots, including the 85 senators who supported it and President Bill Clinton, who signed it into law. The House concluded that DOMA expresses both moral disapproval of homosexuality and a moral conviction that heterosexuality better comports with traditional, especially Judeo-Christian morality. The stated purpose of the law was to promote an interest in protecting the traditional moral teachings reflected in heterosexual-only marriage laws. Were there any doubt of this far-reaching purpose, the title of the act confirms it, the defense of marriage. Justice Alito, in a very long footnote in his dissent, says this. He's rolling his eyes and saying, no way, this is what the footnote says. The degree to which this type of this question about DOMA is intractable to typical judicial processes of decision-making was highlighted by the trial in Hollingsworth versus Perry. In that case, the trial judge, after receiving testimony from some expert witnesses, purported to make findings of fact on such questions as why marriage came to be, what marriage is, and the effect legalizing same-sex marriage would have on opposite-sex marriage. The judge said, permitting same-sex couples to marry will not affect the number of opposite-sex couples who marry, divorce, cohabit, have children outside of marriage, or otherwise affect the stability of opposite-sex marriages. To which Justice Alito correctly states, at times, the trial reached the heights of parody, as when the trial judge questioned his ability to take into account the views of great thinkers of the past because they were unavailable to testify in person in his courtroom. And if this spectacle were not enough, some professors of constitutional law have argued that we are bound to accept the trial judge's findings, including those on major philosophical questions and predictions about the future, unless they are clearly erroneous. Only an arrogant legal culture that has lost all appreciation of its own limitations could take such a suggestion seriously. Back in the Lawrence decision 10 years ago, Justice Scalia said this: if moral disapprobation of homosexual conduct is no legitimate state interest. In other words, Justice Scalia was looking forward to predict what would happen in the future. Is of no legitimate state interest for purposes of prescribing that conduct, what justification could there possibly be for denying the benefits of marriage to homosexual couples exercising the liberty protected by the Constitution? To which Justice Kennedy at that time had told him, you're crazy. It'll never happen. Justice Kennedy now writes, Scalia went on to say this case is about power in several respects. It is about the power of people to govern themselves and the power of this court to pronounce the law. Today's opinion aggrandizes the latter with the predictable consequence of diminishing the former. We have no power to decide this case. The court's errors on both points spring forth from the same disease root, an exalted conception of the role of this institution in America. The court mentions none of this. Instead, it accuses the Congress that enacted this law and the president who signed it of something much worse than, for example, having acted in excess of enumerated federal powers or even having drawn distinctions that proved to be irrational. Those legal errors, they may be made in good faith, errors though they are. But the majority says that the supporters of this act of DOMA acted with malice, with the purpose to disparage and to injure same-sex couples. It says that the motivation for DOMA was to demean, to impose inequality, to impose a stigma, to deny people equal dignity, to brand gay people as unworthy, and to humiliate their children. To hurl such accusations casually demeans this institution. In the majority's judgment, any resistance to its holding is beyond the pale of reasoned disagreement. To question its high-handed invalidation of a presumptively valid statute is to act, the majority is sure, with the purpose to disparage, injure, degrade, demean, and humiliate our fellow human beings, our fellow citizens who are homosexual. All that for simply supporting an act that did no more than codify an aspect of marriage that had been unquestioned in our society for most of existence, indeed have been unquestioned in virtually all societies for virtually all of human history. It is one thing for a society to elect change, it is another for a court of law to impose change by judging those who oppose it, hostis humani generis, enemies of the human race. I've heard such bold, unreasoned disclaimers before. In Lawrence, when the court declared a constitutional right to homosexual sodomy, we were assured that the case had nothing at all to do with whether the government must give formal recognition to any relationship that homosexual persons seek to enter. It takes real cheek for today's majority to assure us that, as it is going out the door, that a constitutional requirement to give formal recognition to same-sex marriage is not at issue here. What has preceded that assurance is a lecture on how superior the majority's moral judgment in favor of same-sex marriage is to the Congress's hateful moral judgment against it. I promise you this, the only thing that will confine the court's holding is its sense of what it can get away with. And the majority's telling the story is black and white, hate your neighbor or come along with us. The truth is more complicated. It is hard to admit that one's political opponents are not monsters, especially in a struggle like this one. And the challenges in the end proves more than today's court can handle. Too bad. That's a vicious and truthful and correct attack. And what's the response been? Bert and Ernie on the cover of the New Yorker, looking at a picture of the Supreme Court. The implication? We all know what they were. We all know what Bert and Ernie were. I mean, really, come on. Gay weddings resume in the state. Prop 8 worries. This is what John Eastman, professor at Chapman Law School, said. It is part and parcel of the utter lawlessness in which this whole case has been prosecuted. Normally, courts let the parties kind of pursue their legal remedies before they issue a mandate. Tonight, it is chaos and lawlessness, and anyone who is concerned about the rule of law ought to be deeply troubled by what happened here. Amen to that. It is a big, big problem, big issue. This is standards just released by the American Academy of Pediatrics to show you how far this stuff is permeating into our culture. Office-based care for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and questioning youth. It gives guidelines for how you deal with sexual orientation of children. It states that we need to get past heterosexism, which means that if you have male genitalia, you should identify with males, and female genitalia, you should identify with females, that's heterosexist. Now, I would suggest to you that you have to have an advanced college degree to believe such nonsense. You have had to have common sense beat out of you, but they say you should no longer, as a pediatrician, ask a youth, a young person, a question like, do you have a girlfriend? And then this morning, this file, the headline in London paper, Michael Jackson, they've looked at records that were kept by his investigator, and he abused at least 24 young children over the years and paid at least $35 million in settlements to keep them quiet. The biggest star on the planet, I might add. The man idolized by more than just about any other. It appears a pervert who should have been in prison. Writing in the London Evening Standard the other night, a homosexual male who has been involved in the fight for equal rights says, you know, I'm not very comfortable with what's gone on. Yeah, we've got equal rights, but what are we doing with them? And finally, somebody on that side is speaking the truth about that lifestyle. And he says this, you can read the article, it says, but am I the only one to notice that the gay scene today seems obsessed with drugs, obsessed with sex, unable to take responsibility for its part in the spread of HIV, inhabiting a soulless and empty world of hedonism? Every week, the number of kids who die while out clubbing or in South London apartments from drug overdoses or choking on GHB goes up. They're involved in homosexual relationships with drugs to enhance their experience or allow them to participate in it. Prosecutions are practically non-existent as the gay scene hides behind its new anti-discrimination laws and calls any such policing homophobic. And he points to at least a couple dozen recent deaths of young people involved in this activity. The Bible addresses this. Psalm 106, addressing the sins of the nation of Israel, and applicable in this case, says, they quickly forget his works. They did not wait for his counsel, but craved intensely in the wilderness and tempted God in the desert. So he gave them their request, but sent a wasting disease among them. God is not mocked. Jeremiah chapter 7 says, but they did not listen to me or incline their ear, but stiffened their neck. They did more evil than their fathers. And I've pointed out continually here week after week that one of the signs of the end times that Jesus said we should look for is that the world and culture would be like the days of Noah, and it would be like the days of Lot. And we know what was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah and the rampant homosexuality and immorality that occurred in those cities. And God judged them. God destroyed them. But before that, he rescued righteous Lot. And it seems that, as we'll see in a moment, the whole world is going mad right now. It's crazy. I mean, there is so much going on that's significant from a prophetic standpoint. I jokingly told Mike last night that I had been able to cut down my presentation today, my teaching today, to about 3 hours. And I won't go that long, but I could, just of what's gone on in the world this week. The world's falling apart. There's chaos. And it does appear to believers, to real believers, to the remnant, that God's judgment is getting close. Now, Martin Luther observed this in his day, and he said this in one of his commentaries: we learn from Jeremiah, the prophet, among others, that as usual, the nearer the punishment, the worse the people become, and that the more one preaches to them, the more they despise his preaching. Thus we will understand that when it is God's will to inflict punishment, he makes the people to become hardened so that they may be destroyed without any mercy and not appease God's wrath with any repentance. So the men of Sodom long ago had to not only despise the righteous Lot, but even inflict him because he taught them even though their own affliction was at the door. Likewise, Pharaoh, when he was about to be drowned in the Red Sea, had to oppress the children of Israel twice as much as before. And when Jerusalem had to crucify God's Son, when its own final destruction was on the way. Again, in Jeremiah 7, it says, "But they did not listen to me, or incline the ear, but stiffened their neck. They did more evil than their fathers." And Ezekiel chapter 8, Ezekiel writing after some of the people have already been carried away in judgment into Babylon, in fulfillment of the prophecies of Jeremiah and Isaiah, who said, listen guys, he judged the northern kingdom, he's going to judge you for your actions. And so Ezekiel is transported in a vision back to the temple in Jerusalem. And he sees women weeping over Tammuz, a pagan goddess. He sees images drawn on the walls of the temple. And then in verse 16 of chapter 8, he says, "Then he brought me into the inner court of the Lord's house, into the temple of God, where the Shekinah glory of God existed." Israel had it all, folks. They had the temple. They had the pattern. They had the teaching. They had the law. They had the Torah. They had the prophets. They had the Shekinah glory, the Ark of the Covenant. And behold, at the entrance to the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men with their backs to the temple of the Lord and their faces toward the east, towards the Mount of Olives, and they were prostrating themselves eastward toward the sun. He said to me, "Do you see this, Son of Man? Is it too light a thing for the house of Judah to commit the abominations which they have committed here, that they have filled the land with violence and provoked me repeatedly? For behold, they are putting the twig to their nose. Therefore, I indeed will deal in wrath. My eye will have no pity, nor will I spare. And though they cry in my ears with a loud voice, yet I will not listen to them." For many years, as we have looked at passages like Revelation chapter 17, people have assumed that the harlot there was clearly some church that was apostate. Dave Hunt wrote a book about it, A Woman Rides the Beast. A fantastic book. You ought to get it and read it. I think it's still in print. It's about the Roman Catholic Church in the last days. But that book was written close to 20 years ago now. And now I would say that the harlot church is not the Church at Rome. It's the so-called evangelical church, because there are so many people in the evangelical church that refuse to stand up to this onslaught of wickedness and depravity in our culture, or even go so far as to support it, like the clip I showed you of Rob Bell a few weeks ago, saying, well, there are brothers and sisters, and they love somebody different than you, so what's the big deal? Culture changed, and we need to get on board with it. But God has very strict, he was talking to people in the temple back in Ezekiel's day, and you can read through the passages of Ezekiel 8 through chapter 24 about the abominations that were going on in Israel at the temple. And it was, and so what happens before the judgment that God visited upon the nation of Israel before the Babylonian captivity will be what's going on in the world in the church before God judges the world at the time of Jesus' second coming. Now I could go through Genesis chapter 18. You know the story of Lot. Lot was oppressed. Abraham first, said the first Jew, and then what he wants to do is he wants to bargain with God, cut a deal. If I can find 50 righteous men in Sodom, Lord, will you preserve the cities? And the Lord says, sure, 50. He goes, well, how about if I'm only 5 short? 45. 45, Jesus said. Then 40, then it goes down to 30, then it goes down to 20, and then finally it goes down to 10. And then he said, oh, may the Lord not be angry. Genesis 18, verse 32. And I shall speak only this once. Suppose 10 are found there. And he said, I will not destroy it on account of 10. As soon as he had finished speaking to Abraham, the Lord departed, and Abraham returned to his place. And then the story shifted, the text in Genesis chapter 19 shifts to Sodom and the two angels who show up to see Lot. And they're telling him what's going to happen, that this is going to be destroyed. And the men of the city come, they want to have relations with the two angels that are there. And the angels, in verse 11 of Genesis 19, they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves trying to find the doorway. Their passion, their depravity burned so deep and was so wicked that when they were struck blind, they were still trying to fulfill that their depraved lust. Now you go over to Romans chapter 1 and you begin to understand what it says, that when God gives them up to degrading passions, they won't be able to reason. Even struck blind, they won't be able to do it. And we see this now rampant in our culture. So we know that Lot was rescued, and they almost had to, and this is a picture of how the church may be in the end times as well. Remember, what did Jesus say? It would be like the days of Lot. And many in the church will be like Lot. They'll be resistant to the rescue. I mean, Jesus said, if I delay my coming, will I find faith on the earth? And it's not a rhetorical question. He may not, because it's going to get rough. And so the solution is you need to be in the Word. But look what it says here. When morning dawned, verse 15 of Genesis 19, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Up, take your wife and your two daughters who are here, or you will be swept away in the punishment of the city." But he hesitated. So the men seized his hand and the hand of his wife and the hands of his two daughters, for the compassion of the Lord was upon him. And they brought him out and put him outside the city. And when they brought him outside, one said, "Escape for your life. Do not look behind you. Do not stay anywhere in the valley. Escape to the mountains, where you will be swept away." But then Lot said to them, "Oh no, my lords. Now behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have magnified your loving kindness, which you have shown me by saving my life. But I cannot escape to the mountains, for the disaster will overtake me, and I will die. Now behold, this town is near enough to flee to, and it is small. Please let me escape there, that my life may be saved." He also said, "Behold, I grant you this." He said to him, "Behold, I grant you this request also, not to overthrow the town of which you have spoken. But hurry, escape, get out of here." And we know what happened. Lot's wife looked back, and she was turned into a pillar of salt. The city was destroyed. It's a picture of what's going to happen just before the rapture. It's going to be tough, but God's merciful. God will give us what we need to say, how we need to act, but it's going to come at a cost. I mean, we've had it pretty easy here in America for a long time. We've never really been persecuted. We've never been a persecuted church. And so because we haven't been stressed, we've gotten a little bit, well, we haven't gotten a little bit, we got a lot fat, a lot sloppy. And now it's time to repent and get back to the Word of God and what the Bible really says, and follow the Word of God and understand the Word of God and prepare for the coming of Jesus. So as John says, so that we can face that day with confidence. You don't want to be shrinking away when you hear the trumpet. You want to say, "I'm ready, Lord." Throughout the New Testament, it is a common theme that the hope of the second coming is what helps sanctify us and make us live holy lives. So that's just one little aspect of what's going on in our culture today. We'll take about another 10 minutes to go through some of this other stuff. This were the headlines in the New Economist, the New Washington Post, the March of Protest, the Summer of Middle Class Rage, and the talk about how there's this revolution going on. This is from the Wall Street Journal yesterday. There's a revolution going on everywhere, and it's in fairly what we considered stable democracies. And my point in bringing this to you like this is, when you see the secular culture saying something's going on, you need to sit up and take notice that something's going on. And look at what the scripture says will be going on at the end times. That's why we focus on it so much in here. Here's Egypt falling apart, its streets a tinderbox bracing for a spark. About a week ago, there was a presidential conference in Israel. There's video, you can find it under Israeli Presidential Conference on YouTube. You ought to just browse through some of the videos there. You would learn a lot. One of the speakers was Ayan Hirsi Ali. She's a atheist, secular person talking about the Arab Spring.
There is a war now. Undeniably, that's a fact, between Sunnis and Shias. The discontent in Syria among the population against their own regime has triggered an unintended consequence, a war between Sunnis and Shias. And as an academic, I'm not supposed to state anything, but ask the question, what are the consequences, intended or unintended, of this conflict? 93,000 people, according to the last count that I have read, are dead. What could be the positive unintended consequence? What could be a negative unintended consequence? The answer to that always depends on who you speak to. The young man in Tunisia who burned himself alive and probably triggered this sequence of events was not demanding political freedom or religious freedom. He just wanted to have his stall, to sell fruits and just feed his families. If you take that, as many economists have done, then the Arab Spring was about an economic uprising. In Egypt today, there are men and women who stand in very long, hot lines, demanding food, wanting to buy bread, and there isn't enough for anyone. And it's the same all across the Arab Spring regions. The economies are today worse off than they were before the revolts.
The Middle East is on fire. We look at it each week. Here's just a little summary of some of the things that are going on. Now you wonder why someone sent this to me. Why Syria? Why is Russia interested? Why is the United States interested in Syria? What's going on? What's at stake? And to some extent, you see this is a report from over 20 years ago, the Eastern Mediterranean Mesozoic Basin, Evolution and Oil Habitat. And what you see is that there's these rock formations, particularly up in the Golan Heights area, are considered to be oil and gas productive. And so this swath of land across the Middle East, Northern Africa and the Middle East, and Syria and Israel still has a lot of oil in it. People want the oil. Russia wants the warm water port. And some of that is centered right around where that warm water port at Tartus is located. Here's a more recent report, just recently, assessment of undiscovered oil and gas resources of the Levant Basin and the Eastern Mediterranean. And that there are these massive oil and gas deposits there. Israel's talking about becoming an exporter of natural gas now. Is that the hooks in the jaw that brings Russia into the final war in Ezekiel 38? Something brings the Northern Alliance down into Israel to take a spoil. Is it oil? I don't know. I mean, it could be. It certainly would fit. But Syria, major problems. The war, They grow a lot of their own wheat, and now the harvest is having to be done early because a lot of the wheat growing areas are right in the midst of all the fighting. You see this, waves of Egyptians are drawn into Syria. That was what Ayaan Hirsi Ali was talking about, the fact that it's a war between Shia and Sunni. Egypt is Sunni, Al-Azhar University, the Muslim Sunni seminary, the most important one in the Middle East, is located in Cairo. That's where Barack Obama went and gave a speech on June 4th, 2010, or 2009. And really, I think, fan the flames of what we see going on now. So the Sunnis don't want the Shia to take control, so they're running into Syria to keep the Iranian arc of influence, the Shia arc of influence, operational. Massive displacement of people into these. This is an updated map of the refugee status, 1.6 million refugees, registered refugees. The number may be as high as twice that, and about 7 million internally out of a population of 20.8 million is the population of Syria at the last census. So 1/3 of the people are displaced in that country, over 1/3. They're growing up in these refugee camps.
But what do you do with all the displaced Syrian refugees? Thanks to the war that the progressives under the leadership of this president encouraged, supported, and in some cases sent arms to. Now we have millions of Syrians that are fleeing into neighboring countries, even to Europe. About 1.6 million Syrians have left their homeland. 8,000 continue to leave each and every day. Where are they going? Who in the Middle East? Who in Europe? Who is financially stable enough to take them? Let me ask you this. Nobody wanted to take the Jews in World War II. Why? Because the Jews had been demonized, right? Nobody wanted to take them. They were the troublemakers. Well, who wants to take a group of Syrian refugees? Is Europe going to do it? Is Europe going to take all of them? Europe is a fiscal disaster zone. And they've already overpromised all of their handouts, and the cars are burning in the streets because people aren't getting their free stuff. They're not going to be able to support any immigrants now, let alone millions. So the Syrians are leaving. Here's Iraq, here's Iran, here's Syria, here's Jordan, here's Israel all by herself. Libya's on fire, Egypt's on fire, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, Greece, everybody's on fire. But what's happening is Syria is saying, you know what, we just got to get over here to Greece. But Greece isn't any better off than war-torn Syria. There's little food, there's no medicine for refugees, even that. If you remember, we told you this would happen about 2 years before it did. We said, look for the rise of the Nazi Party again. Well, it came in Greece, named the Golden Dawn Party. They are violently anti-immigrant. They're actually packing Syrian refugees now into detention camps. This is not going to end well. They stay as hidden as possible because they fear the anti-immigrant violence from the Nazis in Greece. So since the conflict began, 11,000 Syrians have been arrested for doing this, crossing into the border of Greece without permission. But why? Why should anyone care about their borders? Most Syrians now are fleeing over to Jordan. And while Jordan is trying to be a good neighbor, they can't take any more. The sheer amount of refugees is becoming too much to bear. But why? Why should anyone care about people just coming over their border? Well, let's go to King Abdullah II of Jordan. Here's what he said. He said,
Jordan today is hosting by far the largest number of Syrian refugees. The numbers have just exceeded 460,000 Syrians. That is 10% of our population. And the alarming figures, if the rates continue as we're seeing today, will probably double by the end of the year. So for the Americans in the audience, that's the equivalent of 30 million refugees crossing into the United States, with the possibility of that going up to 60 million by the end of the year, relative obviously to our populations. The refugee camp in the north, Zati refugee camp, today is the 5th largest city in Jordan. And obviously this has added economic and financial costs due to the influx and has further strained the economy that is already under considerable external pressures with an unstable region, a sluggish global economy that is still recovering.
God help us all. God help us all for what we've done. Egypt is a hellhole. Libya is a hellhole. Turkey is sliding into it. Iraq is. Iran is. Saudi Arabia, there's oppression everywhere. And now Jordan, the one bright spot. If Jordan crumbles, bad news. Bad news for you, bad news for me, bad news for Israel, bad news for freedom. Because that's it. Jordan is a buffer zone. Here's little baby Israel. Here's the Middle East that's on fire with radical Islam. It makes Israel even more of a sitting duck than it already is. Officials in Jordan and Turkey and Lebanon are begging Europe and even America to take in refugees. I'm sorry. We're going to take in people from the Middle East? That doesn't sound like a good idea, does it? Where's your compassion? But Europe can't accommodate the request. Where are you going to pay? Where are you going to put them in Europe? Where are they going to go? The refugees will collapse Europe. Not to mention start a civil war. People have no place to go. Yet another reason for America not to be involved militarily at all in Syria. We have already made it bad. What could we possibly do to make it better? The entire region is being destabilized.
Turkey is also undergoing a massive uprising against Erdogan. But you know why they're upset? We talked about, I mentioned this before, is we don't know what the trigger will be. Like, we didn't know back in 1914 when a Austro-Hungarian Archduke was assassinated in Sarajevo, that would lead to World War I. We don't know what those trigger events are. So, guy burns himself in Tunisia, kicks off the Arab Spring. Erdogan seems to be going along great. Got reelected, looks like he's going to get to change the constitution. So what did he do? There's an old garden area in Istanbul, and he wanted to build a shopping mall there. And people didn't like that. So now the middle class is revolting against him. And so the whole Middle East is in turmoil. And Lebanon and Sidon. Sidon now in the crosshairs of the Syria crisis. A port city in Lebanon. What's that have to do with Syria? 2 Islamist groups joined the fighting in Sidon. Destruction. There's a prophecy, do you know that? In Ezekiel 28, it says, Son of man, set your face towards Sidon and prophesy against her, say, Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against you, O Sidon, and I will be glorified in your midst. Then they will know that I am the Lord when I execute judgments in her. I will manifest my holiness in her. And I will send her pestilence to her and blood to her streets. And the wounded will fall in her midst by the sword upon her on every side. Then they will know that I am the Lord. Is this the beginning of the fulfillment of that prophecy? I think so. Egypt. Egypt is on fire. The Islamists come out in massive support. At the same time, there are 22 million signatures on a petition against Morsi. And we've referenced this in Isaiah 19 about the fact that I will incite Egyptians against Egyptians, and they will fight against his brother, and each against his neighbor, city against city, and kingdom against kingdom. I will deliver the Egyptians in the hand of a cruel master, and a mighty king will rule over them, declares the Lord God of hosts. So let's see, we have Turkey, we have Egypt, we have the rest of the countries in the Arab Spring, and we have Iran. This new king, or this new president elected, defined as a moderate by most of our media. Here's what CBS had to say about his election a week ago.
Now to Iran, where they've elected a successor to hardline President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. After 8 years in office, Ahmadinejad was prohibited by law from running again. 8 men ran to succeed him. Elizabeth Palmer joins us now from London. Liz, a man named Hassan Rouhani will be the next president of Iran. Is he in the mold of Ahmadinejad?
Well, he was seen as the most reform-minded of all the candidates who ran this time. That being said, they were all very conservative. In U.S. terms, it was as if all the candidates for the presidency came from the Tea Party.
You have to go to college to say something like that. Here, we'll finish with this because we need to get out of here. Here's just a couple-minute clip from Dora Gold speaking at the presidential conference in Jerusalem a week ago. He knows Rouhani, or he knows about him.
Dori, let me just ask you though, because you didn't relate to Iran. Are you at all encouraged? You paint a very bleak picture, but are you at all encouraged by the election results in Iran?
Well, I would like to not be bleak, but I call it realism and not pessimism. With respect to Iran, look, it's been said by everybody that the real power in Iran, the real decision-making on issues of, let's say, nuclear weapons, nuclear arms controls in the hands of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. That is true, but the president can be influential. The president is part of the decision-making process. He can influence, but he can't make the final, ultimate decision. Now, I have to say, I know a little bit about Hassan Rouhani. Years ago, I wrote a book in 2009 called The Rise of Nuclear Iran, and he's the star of my opening chapter. Because Hassan Rouhani was a master of taqiyya, the doctrine of deception, which Ayatollah Khomeini told the Shiites to use as much as possible. And deception means saying one thing and doing something else. In fact, he confessed in 2004 in his speech in Tehran that while he was negotiating with the EU3, Britain, Germany, and France, and he was criticized for that negotiation because he went into a temporary suspension of uranium enrichment, he built, or Iran built, the uranium conversion plant in Isfahan. Conversion is when you make the fuel that's injected into the centrifuges. We won't go into more detail. So he said, hey, I negotiated, but we completed our nuclear program because of my negotiations. So I don't see him as so much as a dove. I see him more as a fox. And hopefully the world will be aware of his contribution, not just to diplomacy, but also to the Iranian nuclear program.
And this, just the last thing, Haaretz, somebody is getting it, says this: if Israel were a sane country, it would have been concerned this week with one thing only, The Economist. The British Weekly is the leading quality news magazine in the West, one of the few news media outlets that give voice to the serious strategic and economic discourse of the global elite. Therefore, when The Economist declared this week that it's impossible to stop Iran's nuclear program, the significance of this statement was dramatic. And here's the cover of the thing: The Rise of Persian Power. And it talks about the things that are going on in Iran and the continue thing. And it looks like, based on what Netanyahu's red line was when he was at the UN, that red line is close to being crossed or has been crossed. He goes this: for 3.5 years, the optimist went from one journalist to another and from one American to another, and so that the pessimist, that's Benjamin Netanyahu, is the pessimist, is a dangerous purveyor of doom and gloom who sees molehills as mountains and doesn't understand that the world won't let Iran go nuclear. For 3.5 years, the optimist tied the pessimist's hands on the basis of the threefold promise of America: the hidden hand and time. But suddenly this week along comes The Economist and says that the optimist's absolute promise was a false promise, that it's too late, that the enriched uranium horses have already fled the stables. The international optimists and the Israeli optimists were wrong, big time. Surprise, surprise. This is a left-wing writer in Israel, by the way. This is very significant. Netanyahu was right. He understood the Iranian challenge better than the others, and he read the map of the campaign against Iran better than others. While the optimists were misled by their illusions, remember, in the end times, Romans 1 will operate on many different levels. They'll operate in people's own personal lives, but it'll operate in geopolitics. God gives them up, and they can't reason. While the defense establishment and the media establishment were smitten with weakness and apathy, the pessimists kept sounding alarms. But because neither the sinking West nor parting Israel paid attention to his warnings, the world has entered a new and dangerous strategic reality. Wolf, wolf, wolf. A strategic wolf with nuclear teeth is now at the gate. But anyone who wants to refute the prophecy of disaster diplomatically rather than militarily must act immediately. We're out of time. We're really out of time. Waking up at 1 minute to midnight will be hard, but waking up at 1 minute after midnight is liable to be catastrophic. And so here is this arc of Iranian influence throughout the Middle East, and we've got to go. A lot of stuff going on. I hope you can appreciate that. Obviously, Revelation 17 looks like next week, unless you want to stay for a few more hours. So look, let's pray and let's go. Lord, thanks for blessing us with your word and your prophetic word and the clear instructions and warnings that you gave to us so that we could be prepared for the times as they would be before Yeshua, our Lord, our Messiah, returns. Lord, help us to always keep that in mind. Order our lives around it. Order our lives around your word and the truth of your word. And help us to use that to live holy lives and to reach out to those family members and friends and others that we meet that don't know the Messiah as their Savior. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.